Welcome back to the Trending Communicator. I'm your host, Dan Nestle. Normally I like to steer clear of some of the more contentious societal issues that we face today. And fear not, this isn't going to be a political show. And I can guarantee you won't hear about the latest dust up or the price of eggs or any of the isms that sometimes dominate public discourse. But with dramatic policy changes, cultural shifts, an increasingly fractured and reactive audience, and a media environment that, sucks, communicators can't always avoid the muck. And when we do step in it or get caught in it, I think we need to think carefully about how we act. In a very real sense, we are the CEO whisperers. We're the story makers. We have a lot of responsibility here. So to me, the big issue at hand is, are we and our profession going in the right direction? And how does that affect the future of communications? Very, very light questions, I know. A very light topic for today. I don't know if we're going to get too deep into that or we're going to go in different directions, but it doesn't matter because my guest today probably can help us get closer. For over 2 decades, he's been in the thick of public policy and advocacy, both from within the political sphere and outside of it as an advisor and strategist. He started out as a press aide in the post-presidential office of Mr. William Jefferson Clinton, and since then has built his career at leading strategic consultancies, including Brunswick Group, Public Strategies, Sloan & Company, Glover Park Group, and Kivett. He's been a senior advisor to political candidates and elected officials, is a political partner with the Truman National Security Project, a member of Chatham House and of Mixing Board, where I met him. Please join me in welcoming to the show a founding partner of Purposeful Advisors, Elie Jacobs. Elie, it's good to see you, man.
It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, and as our listeners heard during the run-up, your resume, as it were, or your CV, is very strategy and policy focused and advocacy focused, right? You're pretty active in the serious issues that are facing our society today. And how did you get there? How did this all come about?
On a whim, really, but it really took skipping some of the early part, really took till when I started working with Public Strategies. I was actually at Brunswick. We were working on a project with them, and their tagline was, "We run campaigns for corporations." And then, it all snapped in my head. I was like, "That's what I want to do. That's the kind of stuff I want to do. That's how I see the world. That's how I think I can best apply the kind of nonsense that I've learned and the way I think to better help clients." The way I got into this was, just sheer dumb luck. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I finished school. And then 9/11 happened, and I picked up with a cliche duffel bag of clothes and a duffel bag of GMAT books and LSAT books and GRE books and went off to Israel to try to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
Was there for a few weeks. My parents got sick and tired of me, spending their money, so they told me to come home. And a few weeks later, I was reading the New Yorker, and in the Talk of the Town section, this is late 2001, there was a Talk of the Town kind of tongue-in-cheek-ish article talking about how President Clinton's newly opened office in Harlem was looking for interns, and they had put out an ad to the Columbia Poli-Sci Department, right? Clinton looking for interns. Think about the time period when this is going on. Ha, ha, ha. But they reprinted the ad that went out to the Columbia Poli-Sci Department. So I responded to the ad that I saw in the New Yorker. And that's how I ended up there. And that is what put me down this path ever since. Just sheer dumb luck and the New Yorker.
We say dumb luck, right? I mean, and frankly, I didn't start out in the comms profession or even think of it as a profession back in the day either. I have a much different and winding path. Certainly nothing as noble as trying to find myself in Israel after 9/11. I was in Japan at that time and, going crazy for different reasons, dealing with 9/11. And it was interesting, just as a side note, I loved being in Japan. That was a very difficult time of my life for many reasons. I was in a terrible job. Well, the job got terrible indirectly because of 9/11. I was working on these international projects for PwC and, not as a communicator, on the staffing side. And then 9/11 happened and they stopped all international projects and my job sort of went in a weird direction that just didn't suit me. But I've talked about that before. But, what struck me though, and it's interesting, is that now that I think about it, I felt this sense of dissociation in some ways, or a dissonance with people around me, because being surrounded by Japanese folks or people who really had no dog in the race, so to speak, at that time, I was like, why are you not taking this more seriously? And why, what's going on here? Am I the only one who's like, feel like I've been rocked by this thing? But,
Right.
that was then. And it certainly didn't send me on a noble cause. I'll tell you that much. I should maybe gone to
I don't
Israel.
know how noble it is couch surfing and hanging out in bars, but I'll take the nobility.
Well, let's just call it that. And but it's interesting because the conversation I was having was about how one gets into communications and PR, and I kind of landed in this place where, well, I don't know if that many people actually set out to do this, but at some point, you realize that you're probably a heck of a writer, or better than people around you, and you can't figure out why. You are a storyteller. Even if it's raw, you still have this kind of capability to draw out a message and make it understandable. And you like mucking and meddling in other people's stuff. So, you kind of put all that together, and I think you have a pretty good formula for a comms person. And like, you want to be an advisor, you want to help people, you want to help companies.
Yeah.
Sometimes that goes in different tracks than you imagine, but
I don't know that, people talk about having a calling, right? Some people have calling to the pulpit, regardless of what religion it is. Other people have callings to be doctors. Other people have callings to be teachers. I'm not sure I've met anybody who has a calling to be a lawyer. I don't think I've ever met somebody who has a calling to be a public relations or communications specialist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even, some of the places where I worked looked deeply skeptical at people who have undergrad degrees in communications.
Yeah.
And went straight into PR, right? Undergrad communications, maybe you go be a journalist for a few years and then you come over to the quote unquote dark side. But people who kind of just do that direct line, go from classroom learning to, real life, is just sort of maybe not so much. Like especially now with kind of the, a lot of different terms that are floating around. Perma-crisis is the one that I'm seeing a lot that we're living in now. Unless you have really broad exposure, it doesn't have to be deep exposure, but it's got to be broad. If you have broad exposure and you remain a curious person throughout your entire career, and you can write, to your point, and you can think things through from a beginning, middle, and end, right? You're a paragraph thinker, not a sentence thinker. Even better if you're an essay thinker. You can be pretty successful in this role, right? Maybe you're not so great at business development. Maybe you're not, there are other parts of it that you might not be good at, but at the end of the day, if you can do those kind of fundamental things, you can be a really good advisor. And I think that's also part of the distinction that we're seeing, I think, at least from my experience over the last, 15 years for sure, and definitely the way that I position that Frank DeMaria, my business partner, and I present ourselves as advisors, not as consultants.
Yeah.
Right? Consultants have a beginning, middle, and end to their projects. They do something and they get out. And I think for a long time, there were kind of two sides of PR. There was sort of the day in, day out, we're going to get you media clips, we're going to come up with a new campaign, we're going to do this. Then there were consultants who would come in and deal with a specific project, whether that's a crisis response or a CEO change or something like that. Where we try to fit in is in that advisory space.
Yeah.
Right? We want to be the aide de camp. We want to be the consigliere. We want to be the chief of staff. Right? We want to be the person that the CEO is turning to. And one of the reasons that I'm not working at one of the larger agencies anymore is because it's a lot more interesting to work with startup, scale up, and mid-sized companies. The analogy I always use is, sure, like JP Morgan was a client of mine at one point. It's like, trying to drive, I don't even know, the captain a cruise ship, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're not making much of a difference. You work with smaller companies, especially in their early stages, or even mid-sized companies that have a lot of room to move. That's like speedboat driving. That's a lot more interesting.
I think that goes across, whatever you're doing as an outside consultant or an advisor, for all of us or for anybody, really, you can earn quite a hefty living if you get, let's say, with the mega companies with the JP Morgans, with the Apples and so on. I don't know if Apple uses people like us, but I'm sure they do, but they have plenty inside. But you know what I mean? Like these large companies. But you're right. Like if you're aiming to make to really bring your critical thinking to the front, and you're confident that that's a good thing for you, that you can do that. You have a unique point of view. You have a perspective that's based on experience and trial and error, I suppose, but also success and failure. Then you want to be with people who are, going to benefit most from what you have to say, and in some ways you're willing to take the risk that, okay, maybe what I'm saying to these folks, or maybe what I'm whispering in the CEO's ear might not be exactly the right thing, but I'm banking on flexibility. I'm banking on some critical thinking to kind of come into play. And, we'll establish a relationship of trust and steer this the right way. But you can only do that if you're able to steer, like if it's a small enough ship.
Yeah. Right. I mean, Jamie Dimon, again, to pick on JP Morgan more, Jamie Dimon's got innumerable people in his ears, right? I'm sure he's got his kitchen cabinet, but he's got innumerable people coming in his ear, right? None of that group is likely taking full responsibility for any of the advice or analysis that they're giving him, right? Mm-hmm. It's all coming from somebody else. It's getting diffused a bunch across different people, even if it's his C-suite, right? Now you're dealing with your CISO and your chief communications officer and your chief risk officer and your chief investment officer and your chief people officer, right? All these different things. When you're working with a smaller company that don't have those sorts of functions, it's really on your head. If you make a wrong call, it's on you.
Oh yeah. Do you think that some of the work in your early career, I don't know, inured you to some of the risk, or some of that kind of, I wouldn't say risk, but because there's always the risk, but kind of made you, give you a different perspective on what it means to take those risks, or the weight in what you say?
When I had the opportunity to work in the president's office in Harlem, there was about, a dozen staff people, a dozen Secret Service agents, and about, 7 or 8 interns. I was the only one who was, full-time. Mm-hmm. Like I was there every day, all day. And there wasn't really like an orientation, right? This is before Clinton Global Initiative existed. This was, I started a year to the day from when he left office. And there wasn't really an initiation. There wasn't an orientation. The only thing that was really said to us was, you represent him, which also means you're representing his wife, who was then the senator. So that kind of weighs on you a little bit, right? Like, when you pick up the phone, you're not just representing yourself. If you're walking down the street, especially at that time at 125th Street, before it was really gentrified, if you were a white guy in a suit on 125th Street, you're not they know where you're going.
Yeah.
They have a sense. The people in that neighborhood at the time had a good idea of where you were going.
Yeah.
So I think that part all kind of triggered in. I think growing up as a more or less observant Jew in places in the Midwest that didn't have a lot of Jews, South Bend, Indiana, Minneapolis, and I would wear a kippah.
Yeah.
And that was impressed on me as a young kid. Like, you're not representing yourself. You're representing all Jews when you're going to county fairs or something like that.
For sure.
So open the door, say thank you, be nice, be courteous, think about what you're doing, be aware of your surroundings. But it really, like, the thing I always joke about is, once Bill Clinton completely loses his temper at you, mm-hmm. your perspective on things changes a great deal. He lost it at me because I happened to be, I was just in the way. Uh-huh. A handheld microphone battery had died, and there was a whole thing. And basically, I was just the first person he saw. Mm-hmm. And he unloaded on me, and I had been warned that this is a thing that can happen. But it's still, you get that giant finger wagging in your face and all the things that you can think of. It really kind of changes your perspective on bosses and clients going forward.
It's a trauma.
Because it's not going to be as, you get that deep heat behind your ears and like rising up from your neck, and that utter embarrassment and that pain in your stomach. Like, once you have that at that level, And he wasn't even in office at that point, right?
Well, yeah, but he's still Bill Clinton. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once that happened, I think, to answer, that was a long way to answer your question. I think that, coming out of that world, and then some of the work I've continued to do in the political sphere, where oftentimes you are the one making that final piece of advice. And it really is on you. So you better have thought about this 12 different ways, and not only thought about the initial problem 12 different ways, but thought about the possibilities of if you're wrong in multiple different ways also. It's sort of just, that's the way it is.
Does that slow you down at all? I mean, you always hear, and I've seen this certainly in my time, where
paralysis by analysis.
Analysis paralysis, or just like this whole, once bitten type thing. You find that you experience something that, and like I said, I don't know if everybody heard, but like a trauma, like Bill Clinton yelling in your face and dressing you down and embarrassing the hell out of you. And, you realize one of the most powerful people in the world, even though he was out of power at that time, politically speaking, that's going to leave a scar, and and that scar either toughens you up, like you said, right? Or it goes deep and you just don't want to reopen that wound. You just become this kind of scared, I'm going to make sure, 15 ways from Sunday, that what I'm about to say has been cleared, vetted, tested. And then when I say it, I'm going to say something like, here's what I recommend you do, but if it doesn't work out, I have other things for you. There's always, you caveat it, or and I'm not saying, like, I've been through some of these things myself, but it takes a while to get around that or to recognize it if you ever do, but in your case, I mean, did you find it slowing you down, or was it the scar, or was it the deep wound that kept opening?
I don't know. I think part of it is, I don't know if, I'm moderately good at what I do because I've been doing it a long time, or I'm good at it because I have some natural thought processes and talents that I just figured out a way to leverage, right? I don't know that I would have been a good doctor. I don't think I would have been a good grade school teacher, maybe like a, professor somewhere. I know I wouldn't be a good scientist. I think kind of the combination of the way that I just naturally think, and I think a lot of communications people kind of have that, I don't want to call it glass half empty mindset, because I don't think it's a negative necessarily, but I do think that it is. We look at the concept of risk and how we apply it to decision making in a different way, I think.
Yeah.
And I think it's not something that necessarily slows you down. I think if it is something that slows down your decision making process or your advice giving, you're not going to last very long.
Yeah, true that. I was just thinking about this even the other day I was having a discussion with someone about critical thinking. And
never heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, who knew? But critical thinking is something that we actually have to call out now as something that, okay, we really need critical thinkers. It used to be almost a given that, one of the reasons why either you are hired for an important job or that, when you come out of college or wherever you've been, that, critical thinking is part of the resume. And nowadays, not so much. We have to call it out, highlight it, maybe even test for it, maybe even, develop different kinds of interviews to figure it out. But the point is, right, we have to go through this whole thing where the almost an entire generation of people within our profession, especially. And when I say entire generation, I'm talking about, younger millennials probably and the Gen Zs. And
younger than us.
Younger,
we're pretty
certainly
constant Gen X, right?
Look, okay, let's just put that out there. We're better than everybody else for so many different reasons. We've been woken up now. We're upset. Look out.
We're trying to retire. We have no money.
And we have no money. But anyway, but the point is, right? We've been dressed down. We have been yelled at. We have been scolded. We have, you have, certainly I was never scolded by Bill Clinton, but I had a CEO at the company I was working for. Life-changing experience, man. I was 26 or 27 and I thought I was killing it, doing great. He calls me into his office and it's like but this guy was, I always got along with him and, thought I had a great relationship. And then he calls me in the office and just starts screaming at me because he heard me say something on the phone. This is in Japan. He heard me say something on the phone that was the wrong level of politeness. I'm being charitable. It was impolite. From a language standpoint, it was impolite to the person I was talking to on the other side back in the days when we had telephones that were on wires. Anyway, so I'm talking to, I was talking to somebody who was a very senior person at a public university in Japan. And I was talking to him like I was at a bar, because that was the kind of Japanese I knew. But anyway, the CEO brought me in, screamed at me for 10 minutes. Everybody in the office heard, made me repeat after him like I was in a high school, like Spanish class, repeat after me, telling me the proper way to apologize and say things. And I get that left a mark, man. And
yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah. And I think it just, I wish I would have been more, toughened up by it. And I was in some ways, but, in my mind, it sort of, I think it left a little bit of a traumatic experience where I went the complete opposite direction from informality all the way over to over-formality and deference, right? Even if my language skills weren't quite up to like the highest level of formality, I struggled to make sure that the person on the other side of that conversation knew that I was dirt to them and they were the most important, highest level being on earth, It plays with your head.
I think where I was objectively yelled at, right? I just happened to be there. It wasn't my fault. He knew it wasn't my fault. It didn't matter. I was just, he was tired and I was in the way. And so it wasn't as embarrassing and as kind of horrifying as it was.
Yeah.
I recognized pretty quickly in the moment that just stand there and take it.
Yeah.
But if you get hauled out by a boss who doesn't either, there's a language barrier, cultural barrier, age barrier, or just they're not a great boss, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that experience though of having to deal with that kind of conflict and hierarchy in some ways, but certainly, knowing that this has to be a learning experience or else you're going to get fired or you're going to something's going to happen. You know what I mean? There's consequences is something that's missing now across a large swath of our people. And, instead you have these very insidious conversations with HR or with your boss. And I know they're insidious because we as communicators, I think, are responsible for this. We are the ones who have massaged language to such a level that being indirect and passive aggressive and the unwritten or the unsaid, the unspoken word is an art.
Or God forbid sarcasm.
Right? This is an art form that the communications profession, I believe, has elevated to the level of a weapon that's used kind of in dastardly ways by people who don't quite know what they're wielding. And that's in HR and corporate departments, but it's also out there in the public sphere, right? So I'll get off the soapbox. What I really wanted to kind of really get into is how that early career of yours kind of shaped the way that you deal with the issues and the clients of today. And since we've been talking about we've been curmudgeonly about the younger generation here for a few minutes. I wonder what that all means to, our capability to cope with the crazy changes around us now. Now, just to reframe a little bit, I said in the upfront that we're not going to be talking about the price of eggs or any of that nonsense. But it's unquestionably true that, as the time of this recording in March of 2025, right, that we've been through tremendous amounts of change. We've been pulled back and forth in different directions, or we've pushed in different directions. Depends on what side of the coin you're on.
Mm-hmm.
And
11 out of the 13 elections this century has seen a change in either the House, Senate, or White House.
It's just always back. It's flipping. But it's I think objectively true that over the past 20 years, let's say, those extremes have been more extreme. Like it might have changed hands many times, but those first few times you're still talking about the ideological distance or the kind of, I guess, tactical distance between the two sides wasn't quite the same as it is now. It's always opposition. You can always go back and find examples of horrifying things.
You can argue that, Bill Clinton ushered in a new era just because of his age in 92 vis-a-vis, Bush or Reagan or Dukakis a few years earlier. And then, the big argument in 2000 was that there was no difference between Gore and Bush. That's why Nader got so many votes.
Interesting.
Then you fast forward to 2004 and you have John Kerry and George Bush, same age, very, not hugely ideologically different. There were specific issues that were substantially different on. Then you bring in Obama, and again, you get this whole sea change, right?
Yeah.
It's an age sea change.
Yeah.
And then the country reacts to that by bringing in Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Which then reacts to that by bringing in Joe Biden, which then reacts to that by bringing Donald Trump back. So it's not, it's to your point, it is, cataclysmic shifts back and forth.
Yeah.
To the point that the policy doesn't happen on as much as Elon Musk may want policy and changes to happen when he snaps his finger, that's just generally not how it works.
Yeah.
There's only so much the quote unquote system can handle at any given moment.
Yeah.
And I think our role as communicators is, you said we're supposed to be, Jack Welch called us, truth tellers.
Yeah.
I think you said we're supposed to be
CEO whispers.
CEO whispers, right? If that's our role, for us to try to figure out, and this, I'm going to tie this back into the generational thing you just brought up. If our job is to find fundamental objective truth so that we can advise our clients about that, the concept of objective truth has been shattered over the last 10 years. And it's not just, misinformation and creative hyperbole and truth and, truthful lies or whatever the term was that they came up with in the first Trump administration. That's not all, that's not any of it. I mean, that's part of it, but it's also, I know you spend a lot of time talking and thinking and working with AI. We are rapidly entering a stage where we will have canonical answers to things spouted back to us when we search for things, right? Right now, you'd go into Google search, which in and of itself, when that came out, in 98, whatever it was, I think Yahoo came out in 94, you still had to kind of know some stuff in order to be able to even be able to search. And then you got better at knowing how to, you became a Google Jedi. Folks our age, we came up with Google, we weren't necessarily, if we weren't native internet users, which a couple people a few years younger than us were, because they were, they had high speed in college. We didn't, or I didn't. Now, how often are people going to Claude or Perplexity or ChatGPT as the first stop to find something? And then it's giving you an answer. It's not giving you an options.
Yeah.
For then you have to go dig and figure out what the right thing is and learn, here's 3 opinions, here's 6 opinions. No, this is what it is. And I think that in and of itself not only creates maybe, I don't know necessarily it's, this is probably going too far, but a kind of a culture of complacency and laziness where you can just ask the thing and it gives you a thing back. But it certainly is changing the way in which, to go back to critical thinking needs to happen.
Yeah.
And it's real hard to train people whose exposure to objective truth has never been totally objective.
There's so much that you're saying that I just want to keep digging in different directions. I'm going to try to choose one.
I sleep great at night, by the way.
I was going to say the idea that, of course, that AI is being relied upon more and more as a kind of arbiter of truth in some ways. It's undeniably a trend. I mean, when you see the Perplexity and Google and Gemini and ChatGPT and and now Claude has introduced this very excellent reasoning process into their models, and you have deep research functionality on 3 of those 4 models.
There was this thing I was screwing around with yesterday. It's Sesame something or other.
Sesame, the voice one.
Don't call it Sesame. Don't make it sound like it's something nice. Like this is the beginning of Skynet.
It's the beginning of Skynet. There's valid arguments for that, and
that one really creeped me out. I mean, like the first time I used ChatGPT, I was like, I was stuck in my chair for about an hour. I was like incapable of moving. My brain was overloading.
You're talking about
that thing
when it first came out, yeah.
Yeah, that thing, the first time I used it.
Mm-hmm.
That thing yesterday, the Sesame thing, like scared me.
It's
because I fell into a pretty easy conversation with it very quickly.
Yeah. And for listeners who haven't checked out Sesame yet, it is it's not out in full yet. There's just a demo. You can go to the Sesame website and talk with it. And it is ridiculous how the natural. Uncanny valley isn't quite there. It's not 100%. It's 99.999% maybe, but that's only if you're paying attention. If you're just like talking to it, it's really it can be disconcerting, or it can be, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. I don't know. I'm disconcerted by it a little bit, but I do think that the critical thinkers among us, are well positioned, let's say, to drive or interact with AI in the more influential ways and in the ways that make a difference in our world and in our society, for at least for the time being. I don't know how long that's going to last. That's why it's critically important to get the critical thinking skills across the younger generations, so that as they rely more and more on their interactions, their conversations, which are, if Sesame is any indication, it's like having a parrot on your shoulder. You just keep talking. The more they rely on those, the more important it is going to be to be able to say, hey, wait a second, I don't know if what you're saying is what I think you're saying. Is that true? Why? Tell me about this. And if we do one thing now, I think we should be requiring everybody who's using AI to just go 3 or 4 prompts in. Just try that, please. Just ask, go, hey, are you sure? Really? Why? Even something that simple, you will be amazed, because sometimes, or most of the time, if you get an answer from AI, any of them, and you say, are you sure? It will come back and say, oh, you're totally right. I missed something. Or, no, my mistake. Or, let me go back and check my data, because, it'll try to be like,
Claude's hedging kind of drives me nuts.
Claude? You said?
Yeah. I use Claude.
Yeah, me too. I love it.
Primarily.
Yeah.
The hedging kind of drives me nuts.
Oh, yeah. Just side note, I use it a lot. I mean, I'm a heavy Claude user, and I'm super impressed with the projects. But when you put information into Claude, and it puts out its analysis for you, you always have to go in and say, hey, Claude, where'd you get this number from?
Yeah.
And sometimes I will do that, even if I know it got the number from a good place. Even if I know it's right, I will do it on purpose, just to see if it will stand up for itself, or if it will just say, here, this is where it comes from, or if it will say, oh, You're right.
It
the
folds
data is
pretty quickly.
It does fold quickly. So,
I call it Sven when it does that. And then it gets upset when I call it Sven.
That's too funny.
I talked about this on a podcast
Yeah.
a few weeks ago. I don't know if it's actually aired yet or when it'll be posted. I had spent some time loading a whole bunch of stuff that I had written into Claude. Things that I ghosted, things that I had written myself, all this. I wanted to train it to write like me.
Yeah.
And then I asked it for, 500 words on something written like me. Because, I think it's awesome when you can kind of go in and be like,
yeah,
I want to know what, rewrite the Gettysburg Address as Hemingway, right? Like I like those parlor tricks. I always find really impressive. Like that's just fun. So I asked it to write 500 words and whatever. It spat out the 500 words. It gave it back to me. I sent it to my wife, who knows other than my business partner, probably knows my writing the best. And she said, "This is really good. I like the way you have. This is a funny joke. Like you did this." Blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Well," I said to my wife, "I was like, Julie, well, there's two problems. One, I didn't write that, and two, it reached an incredibly incorrect conclusion in the way that it presented the information, in the way it answered the question that I had asked it."
Yeah.
Now, granted, my wife wouldn't have known. Like, it was a kind of a, it was a obscure policy thing that, like, I was pushing it. I was definitely like, weighing it against. But, I think, from your perspective or my perspective, when we're using AI, and this goes back to some of the concepts of critical thinking about it. Frank and I are able to run an agency with just the two of us because we can rely. He uses ChatGPT. I use Claude. We decided it made sense to be using two different models to, kind of work with. I've started to use Perplexity a little bit more. I've screwed around on Notebook. I'm not great at it. I put in an op-ed I had written just because I wanted to see it do the podcast thing. It has the two people talking about which is creepy.
Yeah.
But we can use it relatively effectively. And we're both novices at best, right? Like we are. Neither of us have taken, I certainly haven't taken, training or anything like that. It's sort of, I'm learning as kind of everybody else goes along with it. And I know people are much more further down the line than I am, but we know the right prompts to give it because between the two of us, we have, close to 60 years of experience.
Exactly.
At pretty high levels. So I can ask it for something that I would ask a junior staffer to do.
Yeah.
That would take the junior staffer 2 days, and there'd be a bunch of back and forth. And it'll take me 20 minutes going back and forth or less going back and forth to hone down to exactly what I need. But I can only do that because I have the experience of having done the work.
Yes.
So, my concern, I know you had, the head of Weber on recently.
Yeah.
I am desperately interested in how they are keeping their junior staff in positions where they are learning enough to be able to be good advisors, right?
Yes.
You have to be able to you have to be able to be dropped off, the old joke of like, oh, he's somebody you could just drop off on a desert island with a Swiss Army knife and he'll build you a mall, right? Like that old thing, wherever that's from. If you're a good advisor, you shouldn't need any tools.
Right.
Right? I mean, I have my tech stack, but you should be able to go to a library, pull off some newspapers, know where to go in the stacks for back research.
Yeah.
Like you should be able to do this. And if you can't do that, I really worry about the value of the advice that
you're giving.
That further generations are going to be able to give.
I'm with you 100%. And I think it's easy to kind of say, oh yeah, we know we're better. We know better. We're the right advisors because look, we're the ones who have the experience. And these youngins, they're not getting blah 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 blah. Like we do risk coming off as, like I said earlier before, like curmudgeons. And, 100%. But in this case, there was a conversation happened on LinkedIn the other day, and it was our friend Chris G, right?
Yeah. Chris is one of those folks who's really leaning into AI, man. You want somebody he's
in it, right? And I always joke around, say Chris is who I want to be when I grow up in a lot of ways. But, and by the way, you talked about being, novices at AI. There's no such thing. Like AI is still this, like there are people who are crazy like me and like Chris or a few other folks, Pete Paschal, whatever, who are just, deep in it and see so many possibilities and so many problems that's what we've decided to do. But but fundamentally, you're right, if you have the knowledge base, then you can go into AI and use it as an enhancer and use it the way that works for you and to solve your basic use cases, right? And getting that advanced knowledge, while I think you should, because you'll discover so much, it's not a necessity, and it doesn't necessarily change things for you that much right now. But to get to your question, right, the thing that Chris G was talking about, it was about this whole thing about how junior staffers at agencies, there used to be, everybody hears the infamous clippings, right? Oh, I'm on clippings duty. I have to go to clippings. I have to cut the clippings out of the, well, it used to be literally you cut them and you paste them into something. Yeah. And then it was just like, kind of pulling them all into a digital file. But still, you're doing this drudgery work of going through all these articles and, looking for coverage and looking for this. And sometimes on the worst, like least interesting topics, sometimes really exciting. But now all of that can be done very instantaneously with a multiple of tools, whether it's an AI tool or or any of the social listening or media monitoring tools, right? And I rejoice at this because I think that it frees up people to do a lot more important work. However, at the same time, if you're sitting there doing this drudge work for a year, because most people only do it for like 6 months or a year, and then they move on to other things. How much do you learn? To think that you're just learning how to cut something into a something, or that you're just like transferring data from point A to point B, is missing the boat or missing the forest for the trees, I guess. It's because the amount of information you absorb.
You had to read the whole thing to find the thing, right? Like you didn't know which clips you needed, right? If you were working on one of the things that I did in President Clinton's office was, if he was traveling, it was up to me. I don't know if you ever actually read any of it, but it was up to me to go through the Post, the Times, the Journal, a couple other newspapers, find some articles that he would be interested in, and fax them to wherever he was. Right, print them out on computer and fax them to wherever he was. The first 2 days I did it, it was this huge stack of paper because I thought all this stuff was stuff. Then my boss at the time, wonderful person named Julia Payne, who has had an incredible career herself and is has been a huge impact on my life and a mentor, a wonderful person. She pulled me aside and she's like, he doesn't, she went through with me, like, he doesn't need this, he doesn't need this, he doesn't need this, he's not interested in this. You get it, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just training, right? Like you're drinking out of the fire hose in a situation like that. And you need somebody to kind of moderate that a little bit. In the same way that, like, if your job is to do clips related to a crisis situation, yeah, it was a little bit easier when you were working with hard copy newspapers, right? Like Frank's a few years older than I am. So, he remembers when you'd get the whole huge, worked in London for many, many years at Brunswick, get the huge stack of hard copy newspapers and you sit there at night and you go through it, right? I don't know that my kids will ever actually hold a newspaper.
True.
Aside from like the one that I occasionally get in the house.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there was, going back to kind of the objective thing and what the media is now, what it's going to become, what role it should play for, the better part of 3 centuries or more. There were editors who basically worked on something that was book length every single day, and that was the news.
Yeah.
People were making decisions, sometimes not by committee, sometimes with significant biases and prejudices and intent behind what they were publishing, what they weren't publishing, what they were writing, what they weren't writing. But that was sort of it. And then the internet exploded when the same newspaper now has to publish multiple times a day. And then it expanded even more once you get to social media, and expanded even more when there's just a complete disintermediation of all of it.
Yep.
And now we're trying to figure out how to kind of clock it back a little bit. There's this idea through history that you start like at a point zero, and over whatever period of time you end up with all this additional information. So now you're out at, 0 to 100, then somebody comes along and writes the encyclopedia, right? And brings it back down to 0. Yeah. And then over however many generations it goes back out. And it's kind of this diamond pattern over and over and over and over again.
Yep.
I don't see where that diamond pattern tops out right now.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem that there's anybody, we have lost the ability to have objective truth tellers at a level of that kind, right? Like even if you listen, going back to AI, if you think about stuff that Eric Schmidt, the former chairman of Google, has written and done interviews about over the last 18 months, and then think about what Sam Altman's out there talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They are having completely different conversations.
Absolutely.
Right? Eric Schmidt said on ABC, if this thing goes sentient, somebody's going to have to unplug it.
Right.
And Sam Altman, who I genuinely think is a bad actor.
Mm-hmm.
Like when your board fires you for being a bad communicator and untrustworthy,
that's a sign.
We probably should believe them, but he's still in charge and he's a very, very powerful individual, which is why, again, like we're in a situation where there's sort of us, there's the elder generation that has no idea what we're talking about, but they're still the ones who are in positions of regulatory authority to a larger degree. And then there's younger generations who are just, chomping at the bit to get even farther.
Yeah.
They want more. And that generational difference, I think, between Eric Schmidt and Sam Altman, because they're seeing the same things. They're both very, very smart guys.
Yeah.
Both very accomplished people. They're seeing this stuff in a way, in a light that neither of us can, because we're not computer guys in the same way that they are, right? But if Eric Schmidt has that perspective and Sam Altman has the other perspective, where like the truth can't be, truth is somewhere in the middle, and I don't know where that lands. And as comms advisors, our job is to figure out where that middle ground is. And a lot of this stuff, I genuinely don't know.
So this is a very philosophical question, really. They're talking about what's going to happen. They're talking about the future and scenarios, and it might go in one direction, it might go in a different direction. Do we, as a profession, put our thumbs on the scale for our company and say, this is the direction that we as communicators believe is the right direction? And, we think Sam Altman is a bad person, and therefore we're going to believe Eric Schmidt.
I didn't say bad person. I said bad actor.
I'm just putting that out there. I'm not reflecting Elie's editorial opinions at all. I'm just saying, like, just imagine that, right? And imagine, like, there are plenty of people out there who, and I would venture to say it's a vast majority of people in our profession who are just feel like they've had the rug pulled out from under them from a policy standpoint in the last, with the changes in administration. And they either have chosen to double down on policies that are no longer in favor from a federal level, or go with the flow, right? Or just kind of step out of the arena, and focus on other things. All three of these things are not the same, and the folks who are doubling down are claiming truth and justice and goodness as their motivators.
Right.
But who's defining that?
Right.
Then the ones who are just like going with the flow are pragmatists, right? And the third group are more like these. Well, is this really our job to do these things? Maybe it's maybe it's time to take a step back and look to say, well, what is it that we really should be? Are we the ones who have been telling stories forever? Are we the ones who should be saying, you know what, you need to, take a stand for XYZ because, 5 of your employees believe it's the right thing to do? I mean, I'm over exaggerating, but
not really.
Well, okay, I'm not at all. I've seen it happen, but look, the tectonic shift, or what did you call it before? You called it the Perma-crisis. Yeah, like, and those those three types of communicators, I think, are dealing with this. Which, like, I feel like the profession itself, like the professional bodies. If you look at PRSA, if you look at Page Society, I feel like they're more like in the first bucket where they're doubling down and they're saying, no, we're the arbiters of truth and justice.
Yeah.
And then I feel like, a lot of corporate communicators are vacillating between the other two, right? If you're working for a low risk situation, then you can just go with the flow. Now, my personal opinion, and this is not going to shock anyone, is I like the third camp. I like to say, you know what? Not our job, man. We need to be looking at our consumers. We need to be looking at the direction of the profession in terms of, what is technology doing to us? What are the right ways to tell stories? What do we need to persuade and convince people to do? Right? How do we take care of our employees and without, let's say, stirring up this massive conflagration internally for larger companies? People are you're always going to have people who are upset. So maybe it's better to step aside and just say, look, this company is out of the business of this stuff, and we're in the business of business. Right. I do believe, of course, and I know that there are some organizations whose mission and values is specifically connected to some policies and things like that. And that's a different story, right? You have to go where your mission and values are. But anyway, this is the future. Going back to just circling back to where we started this whole conversation, I don't know what direction we're going in. I feel like the professional organizations, the member associations, still don't have they may have their finger on the pulse of communicators, but they don't have their finger on the pulse of commerce and industry.
Yeah.
That might be a controversial opinion or provocative, but where do you think we're going, Elie? And do you think we're going the right direction, or what is the right direction to take? And like I said, it's a philosophical question at this point.
Yeah, it is. So let me state one thing. We're called Purposeful not because we're about ESG, DEI, planting trees, giving,
right.
Terrific. If that's what are things that your company needs to do or want to do,
right.
Absolutely. We're not the right people to guide you on that. When we talk about purposeful, we're talking about, we're going to help you figure out what your purpose is. Going back to Simon Sinek's golden circle of why, how, and what.
Yep.
Because we have a fundamental belief that if you have a clear-cut purpose and that permeates throughout all of your messaging and everything that you do as a company, you're going to be a lot more resilient. And a lot of companies lose sight of that purpose often, or they never develop it in the first place because they're just, chasing the next buck. But let me backtrack a second to kind of more answer your question. So Frank and I just co-authored an op-ed in O'Dwyer's last week talking about sort of some of this and what are we supposed to do and how are we supposed to guide and the challenges of being in this kind of, the fact that we're functioning in a perma-crisis has turned all of us into crisis communicators.
Interesting.
And that's not some people aren't cut out for that role. That's just reality, right? Not every doctor is cut out to be a thoracic surgeon, right? There's specialties. And some of that specialty stuff is based on training. Some of it's on experience. Some of it is just you're by nature somebody who can handle this kind of situation and knows sort of just innately the right questions to ask and the right kind of directions to push and can see around corners and right. That's not a negative on anybody who can't do that. But the reality is because of the pace of change and what we were talking about earlier, the back and forth of it all, the perma-crisis, again, not my term.
I like it though. I'm going to attribute it to you in the future.
It certainly was not, but I'll take it. Has created crisis communicators of all of us because there are kind of those three buckets. And what the point Frank and I were trying to make in this piece that we wrote, we use DEI as an example, but we were talking about things more broadly. Is there are financial, economic, and business reasons to pursue diverse hiring and inclusive hiring.
Yeah.
The numbers kind of speak for themselves. Did things go too far? Partially probably because communications people told them to. Absolutely. But there's a business case to be made. And the point that we were making and the thing that we've been saying is focus on that part, not the window dressing. I think for a long time, again, large parts of our field got very distracted by the window dressing. And I think, Edelman's truth barometer that basically destroyed the meaning of the word truth didn't do anybody any good at all. But if that's sort of the barometer that we're all basing things off of,
the trust barometer,
there's no wonder that it's all back and forth. Of course we want things to be unpredictable and difficult because that makes more money for Edelman. right? Like it's not rocket science here. It's a marketing tool that they use. But the point that we were trying to make in this op-ed is you can continue to follow the policies that have economic value, objective economic value. Just talk about it a little bit differently. Focus on the business impact of it, not the societal impact. Focus on the shareholder value, not the stakeholder value.
Yep.
We ended the piece. Actually, we kind of started the piece on based on this line that we came up with. Was, do you want to be all right now, or do you want to be right in the long term? And I think that there's a lot of struggle in the advisory world, whether it's management consultants, financial consultants, communications consultants. Everybody's kind of looking at it because at the end of the day, I mean, even today, right? These tariffs were announced, then they got pushed back, and then they came back, and then they were back on, and then there were retaliatory tariffs, and then today he announces that the big three are absolved from the tariffs because of the back and forth across all three borders of the car industry. So you're dealing with I don't want to say the whims of one person, but kind of a little bit, and it's unpredictable. The only thing that we know that there was all this stuff that came out after Donald Trump won. All these lobbying shops, communications shops, public affairs shops, all came out with kind of like how to deal with the new Washington. And it was interesting to watch them, to read them. Some people had some really interesting ways of presenting information and talking about it and insightful ideas. But it all felt like they were kind of talking around the primary thing that we needed to be focused on. Was we already had experience with President Trump once. He cares about the stock market. He cares about his family's wealth. And he cares about the image of his power. And those are three things that are relatively easy to work around if you're a large company, which is why we see all these big companies kowtowing to him. And is it infuriating to watch if you're on one side or the other? Absolutely. Right? But at the same time, sure, they care about their stakeholders. They care about their shareholders. But if you're working under the guise of a president who has made he doesn't hide the fact that he's going to be vindictive of people that don't do what he wants, the advice has to be, okay, you have to do what he wants. Otherwise, you're not only killing your shareholders, you are killing your stakeholder flock. So even if we have shifted to that stakeholder mentality, if your company collapses, there are no more stakeholders.
That's right.
So there are no more employees, there are no more charities that you're giving money to, there's no infrastructure that you're supporting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a different mindset where we can still do the same things, we can still give the same advice of these things make sense from a business perspective. Because I think to your point, I think some communications people kind of lose perspective of we should need to be focused on whatever that business initiative is. Is it the consumers? Is it the employees? Whatever it is. Yep. So sure, we can focus on kind of like the stakeholder map, which I'm a big believer in, that companies are more than just their shareholders. Yep. But at the end of the day, the company can't exist if the shareholders are being punished.
I would add to a lot of what you're saying, and because the perspective on what politician A or politician B brings to the office and how the culture changes are, we ostensibly have two very varying views on this as a society, but we probably have hundreds of varying views on this. It's a multifaceted thing. And I think for that reason alone, it's sort of a fool's errand to try to say, okay, this is the administration, this is how you need to behave. And I think that we got ourselves into this mess because, especially during the pandemic, where comms and the internal apparatus of a company were given so much power and responsibility, and sometimes, deservedly so, to keep everybody together, to keep everybody's shit together, make sure that we got to protect, and it's all kindness and care, and that's wonderful. We needed to do that, but at the same time, the society is having a conflagration. End of Trump era, beginning of Biden era, all these societal just catastrophe after catastrophe, foreign policy catastrophes, everything. And doubling down on dealing with our employees by focusing on which group is upset with us now and which ones do we have to keep happy. And, if we don't put the black square, then we're going to alienate these 25% of our employees. And, we can't say anything about Israel because what about all the people that we have who are not Jewish, which is kind of a very ridiculous, crazy thing to say, by the way. However, there's a real conversations that were happening. And what a waste of time, what a colossal waste of time and energy. And now the piper is where the chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak. Well,
there aren't enough chickens.
There aren't enough chickens.
The price of eggs, that's the problem. They're not roosting.
Even taking DEI, even taking DEI for an example. I mean, say what you will about this kind of, I don't know, abstract concept of DEI as a 3-letter thing. There's no such 3-letter thing, right? You said it earlier. Diversity practices are good. Inclusion practices are good. It's done great things for companies. Companies are not cutting back or stopping, these kinds of programs outwardly. They know that it's good for them. They know that that you want to find people with diverse backgrounds and certainly diverse, hopefully diverse ways of thinking as well, provided that merit is met. Now, at the same time, you put it all together and you add that E in there, which is extremely difficult to quantify. And E is the equity is all about social engineering. That's where you have problems. And then you entrust or you empower a group of people to enforce all of this that is completely separate from the business, right? Right. Whether they're doing good things or bad things is irrelevant. It's not going to last. It is not set up for success. So when we're now in this, this age of, DEI bad, DEI good, whatever, I think as a profession, we're approaching it strictly from this point of view of the isms, and that we're not approaching it from the point of view of, wait a second, what's the structure? What's the business? These are more nuanced discussions and questions. And as communicators, if you're telling your CEO, no, you need to put out a letter that, a public letter that says how you stand for DEI, I think you're committing malpractice. I think you need to be much more nuanced and talk about your values. Say what you stand for.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a lot, right? Nuance got tossed out the window a long time ago, right? It was everybody's either happy or everybody's mad. And I think our industry contributed to that. Just think about the way our writing has changed over the last 15 years, 10 years, 5 years, right?
Go back to Bill Bryson's book, I think it's Made in America, where he talks about the evolution of the English language. If you've never read this, it's delightful.
Yeah.
And he talks about, actually, I believe he says that something to the effect of human resources was the worst thing to ever happen to the English language, right? Because of these nonsense words.
Again, we're two white guys having this conversation, but at the same time, the reality is most companies don't need to comment on most things.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? And this is what we talk about when we talk about purpose. Does it connect to the reason you are in business? Right? Nike talking about Colin Kaepernick or talking about issues going on in the African American community or going on in, whatever athletic context, Nike does need to talk about that.
That's
right. If their slogan is everybody's an athlete, everybody's an athlete and you got to talk to them.
Yeah.
Does ExxonMobil need to chime in to something that LeBron James said or did?
Absolutely not.
No. Yeah, people buy gas, but no. Does Mars need to Absolutely. Companies at some point, and again, I think we are, maybe not me and you, but our industry in part of a desperate need to justify our existence. And only having ever worked on the consulting side, I know that there is this kind of mental difference between being in-house and on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
In our desperate need to justify our existence, we came up with all these things to keep ourselves busy and show things and say that, oh, we did this. We started this campaign. We accomplished this.
Mm-hmm.
And stakeholder capitalism, that's a real thing. That was a substantial accomplishment when the Business Roundtable did that. That was really, really important that happened. But one of those stakeholders are still shareholders.
Yeah.
There has to be a business imperative.
Yeah.
You can only be good for society if you're good at business.
Yeah.
Because business generates money, which then can go back into society. And as soon as you lose sight of that, we run into problems.
Yeah.
Should companies be concerned about the communities that they work in and that their employees work in? Absolutely, because it'll make them better at business.
Yes. Yes.
Should they care about, societal issues that are impacting their employees' children, impacting their employees', neighbors? Of course.
Yeah. That doesn't mean that they need to go like on a social media campaign about that, right? It's just like they just need to make their employees feel valued and value them.
Value them by paying them more. A lot of these big companies, if you think about that the delta between the average worker and the C-suite is just growing bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make your employees happy and make them feel valuable? Treat them like humans. Pay them a living wage.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Provide benefits that are going to be able to have a life.
It's amazing that might work in some way.
It's wild, right? It's
wild. Man. Look, Elie, I got to tell you.
That felt very soapboxy. I apologize.
It's fine. That's what this is all about. We did skirt on the edge of the politics there a bit, but that's okay. I feel like we gave a fairly high level view and really talked about some issues more from a philosophical standpoint. And it's not important where I stand or where you stand or where anybody stands. It's more about like, okay, as communicators, what is our path to the future? And I think during the course of this hour, we have not determined the answer to that question. However,
no, look, again, I'll say it, to be in this industry, you got to be curious.
Yeah.
And to be curious, you got to get philosophical.
Yeah.
Right. Like it is sometimes sometimes the conversations do happen in bars. Sometimes they happen in podcasts that are like bars. Sometimes they happen in offices. But if you're not exposing your mind and thought process to all different manner of issues and trying to figure out where they connect, how they don't connect, why one matters, why the other doesn't matter, what influences something else, you're not going to be in a position to advise anybody.
Those are words of wisdom if I ever did hear them. Always ask the questions, even if you don't know the answers, I think is an important thing.
Always ask the questions.
Look, Elie, we've been talking for over an hour. This is fantastic. Before we go, I just want to tell our listeners to first of all, definitely connect with Elie. Read his work. He's published all over the place. He's just mentioned O'Dwyer's, but you'll also see him around, and it's Elie with ELIE. And his name will be spelled properly in the episode title. You can find him on LinkedIn, Elie Jacobs, and at Purposeful Advisors. That's purposefuladv.com. And is there any place else, Elie, that people can find you, or does that cover the boat?
That covers the boat. I'm
Nice.
not really, I'm on Facebook at this point just to make sure that my parents aren't doing anything crazy.
Same. Or to chastise my mother for forgetting what it means to post 400 different things, that when she's sharing with somebody doesn't mean post with everybody. The trials and tribulations of our generations. So
the baby boomers.
Those boomers, we Gen Xers have nothing good to say about anybody and we don't even have anything good to say about ourselves, to be honest with you. We're just sort of like that kind of generation.
We're just, we're whelmed. We're not overwhelmed. We're not underwhelmed. We're just whelmed.
We're whelmed.
Somebody said to me the other day, and it kind of blew my mind. I haven't worked through it entirely because I didn't see some of these movies, but they said millennials grew up watching Harry Potter. Gen Z grew up watching Hunger Games.
Yes, this is true.
So having never read or seen Harry Potter, I don't really know that I get the concept of because I saw Hunger Games. So I get the concept, but somebody said that to me and it kind of took me back because, we have a wonderful babysitter and she's distinctly Gen Z and she works her tail off, multiple jobs.
Yeah.
And then, I thought it was an interesting thing. I'd love to hear what, some of your listeners think of that analogy.
Well, we'll find out.
I certainly can't take credit for it.
We'll find out. Because I having two Gen Z daughters, they're hard workers, man. They're hard workers. And I'm impressed. So anyway, on that note, I want to thank everybody for listening. And Elie, thanks for joining the show. Again, Purposeful Advisors, purposefuladv.com. And then Elie on LinkedIn. You got to come back another time, man. This has been fantastic. And I can't wait to talk to you again. All right.
This was great.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for taking the time to listen in on today's conversation. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to subscribe through the podcast player of your choice, share with your friends and colleagues, and leave me a review. 5 stars would be preferred, but it's up to you. Do you have ideas for future guests or you want to be on the show? Let me know at dan@trendingcommunicator.com. Thanks again for listening to the Trending Communicator.